Okay, we are 1 week closer to Alan Wake 2, which only means that we have to delve right back into the past games in the story along with the Remedy connected universe. I actually mentioned this video in my past Alan Wake 2 hype up video last week, and I already went a little bit into the details, but in this video I am going to be explaining one of the craziest and one of the most interesting, confusing, and all-out convoluted shared game universes between multiple game franchises. Now, if you know the games Alan Wake, Quantum Break, and Control, well, they all, plus more Remedy games, either exist in a full-blown connected universe or are just heavily referenced with Easter eggs and files. So if you want to hear more about one of the craziest yet intriguing game universes I have ever uncovered, then sit back and let me get right into the Remedy game universe. So yeah, I bet a few of you already know about the games being connected. I mean, Alan Wake actually makes an appearance in the AWE DLC for Control, along with all of the easily found Easter eggs in all of the games, but I bet you did not know how deep this connection even goes. I mean, I was constantly having my mind blown while uncovering every little secret and detail that you would either have to break down with borderline mathematics or need an English degree to break down the metaphors and analogies. But after this video, your brain will be completely jumbled, but you will be glad that you stuck around. I also want to say a couple of prefaces before hopping right into the first game. First being that there is an extreme amount of little details and connections, and I will not be able to get to every single one, obviously. I mean, I can already tell that this is the longest video I have ever done, and I really want to get to the bigger connections overall. The next thing I want to make known now is that I know that Sam Lake admitted in 2023 that due to Microsoft owning the IP of Quantum Break, it is technically not a part of the connected universe. Though after I get through with it, I think you will all completely disagree, as the evidence really is damning. And now that we have that aside, I also want to say that the way I will go about this video is I will go down the games in order of release, and I might leave one or two out, as there is either not enough time here or just not enough in those games that connect it. I also want to say really quick, I know this is a thick video with 2 capital C's, but trust me, if you sit back and listen, you will get your mind blown as well. Honestly, without further ado, I think it is time to hop right into the first game. Okay, before we get into things any further, I just want to say this video is way longer than my usual vid, and it would mean a whole lot if you could just hit it with a like. And if you find yourself enjoying it any part through the video, just know that that subscribe button is down there. But now, time for Alan Wake. Now, I will start by saying that Alan Wake was the first game to establish the quote-unquote connected universe. Therefore, there's honestly not a lot of connections to the other games, as most of the connections come from the other games connecting to Alan Wake. That does not mean there are not some interesting connections to other Remedy games, along with bringing up certain references that the other games will end up connecting to. So the first thing I want to bring up is Max Payne, actually. Now, sort of the same with Quantum Break, due to Remedy no longer owning the rights of Max Payne, only making the first 2 games, it was actually announced that the universe are not, in fact, officially connected. Though it is just interesting that the story character Alex Casey, who is a crime detective written up by Wake, with the Alex Casey novels being Wake's most popular series. Now, what is interesting about that is not the fact that Casey ends up being written into existence in Alan Wake 2, but the fact that from the documents and sections from the Alex Casey series that you can find around the games, a whole lot of the same things that happened to Alex Casey are the known events that actually happened to Max Payne. Now, this could just be one of those reference Easter eggs, just throwing homage at the Max Payne series, or maybe secretly, Max Payne exists in the same universe as a real officer, and Alan ended up writing a series based off this real person. Though, as I said, this is just a small thing that could go either way. The next thing I want to bring up is Night Springs, the TV show that is apparently based off of Bright Falls. Now, you can find clips of this Twilight Zone knockoff all over Alan Wake, but clips of the show, along with branding, pops up all over the place in the other games. though I will get to them when I get to the other games. The next thing is actually a band that can be found in Alan Wake. If you know the two older gentlemen that are found at the diner and the mental hospital, Tor and Odin, they are actually a band called the Old Gods of Asgard. If you played Alan Wake, you would know about their farm with the stage and the freaking dragon, but their music and even themselves are kind of important when it comes to the other games as well. But the last thing that is a bigger deal in Alan Wake itself is the shoebox that Alan finds the clicker or the light switch in. So the shoeboxes are actually a huge deal in the other games, and I don't even think they knew how big of a deal the shoeboxes would actually become. But if you know the game Control, all of those shoeboxes are actually special objects of power where altars and ripples do not affect what's inside the box, meaning that they are immune to altars. And once again, this is just one of those things that will become way bigger when I get to the other games. But really, those are the big Alan Wake things that will be popping up around this video, along with some other things, but they will come when they come. And now, I want to move on to the next game in the main trilogy, and that is Quantum Break. Again, really quickly, I want to preface that I do know that Quantum Break is not officially connected to the other games, as Sam Lake, the writer of the games, came out in 2023 to say that Quantum Break is not actually a Remedy IP. Therefore, it is outside of this connected universe. I do want to say as well, though, that the evidence you find in Quantum Break, it is not just mere references and connections. It goes so deep. So, hopping right into the first thing, and that is the trailer for Return at the beginning of the game. I went into this a little bit in the last video, and I will also be going into it a little later in this video, but you can find a TV in the campus right at the beginning of the game before meeting up with Paul. When clicking on the TV, it will show you a trailer for a new TV show called Return. Sound familiar? In which Alex Casey, along with another FBI agent, are searching for Alan Wake, who's been missing for 6 years at the time. This shows Casey dying, along with Wake and Scratch fighting to be in control. And Return is actually huge, being the manuscript that both Wake and Zane discuss in Control, and is the manuscript that seems to have pulled him out of the dark place in the trailer for Alan Wake 2. Now this is not just an Easter egg, but it also comes back to this House of Dreams bringing up the Return manuscript way before Quantum Break, along with American Nightmare. And it makes a bigger deal with this House of Dreams actually being confirmed connected to the other games. Now this Return trailer is actually one of the biggest connections in this video, but I want to return to that later, pun intended. The next thing I want to bring up is that you can find Alan Wake's book, The Sudden Stop, all over the place in Quantum Break. Even Jack Joyce referring to Wake, saying that he loved his work. Now again, one could say this is just a small Easter egg, until you learn what The Sudden Stop is about. The Sudden Stop is about the death of Alex Casey, Wake's most profitable character. Looking back at that Return trailer, it depicts the actions of that book, including even the death of Alex Casey. Now, what is also interesting about The Sudden Stop is that The Sudden Stop is the last book that Wake wrote, right? Well, you can actually find a chalkboard in the university, and on that chalkboard there is a whole lot of really important information to this game and the connections. The first thing being that apparently students are studying Alan Wake and his writing before his disappearance, and one of the books in question is Departure. Yeah, the same manuscript being written in Alan Wake, and the same object of power that sent Wake to the dark place. This means when Wake went missing, his book Departure was still written and found, ultimately meaning this is the first game to confirm that Wake was not crazy in his game, and he did in fact get sent to the dark place. Along with that, the chalkboard mentions AWEs and what they could be. Maybe not ever name-dropping Altered World events, but still discussing AWEs in general. The next huge thing that chalkboard talks about are the shoeboxes and what they might be. Even adding in that the shoebox contents cannot be altered before we even knew what the shoeboxes were. Aside from this House of Dreams, this is the only other knowledge we had on what the shoeboxes could have been at the time. And aside from the chalkboard, you can find AWE written all over the game, whether it's just people talking about what they could be or just graffiti showing the letters. on to the next thing I want to bring up in this game, and that is a band named Stone Crow. So you can find posters for Stone Crow, along with Paul wearing their shirt a couple of scenes. But who might Stone Crow be, you might ask? Well, Stone Crow is actually an homage band to the old gods of Asgard. Yeah, the same geriatric band from Alan Wake. It is not even an assumption, there is full evidence of it. First, Will can actually be found wearing an old gods of Asgard shirt, but the Stone Crow shirt that Paul wears is for the Balance tour. Now, Balance is referring to the old gods of Asgard song, Balance Slays the Demon, which can actually be found being sung by a Monarch Guard. Another thing pointing to it is the fact that Stone Crow's Balance tour also stops in Bright Falls, which would only be expected because that is the home of the band they are playing homage to. So with all of that, it is only proven that the old gods of Asgard are in fact real people. And if that is the case, their music is heavily based off the scary stuff going on in Bright Falls. And that means that Bright Falls is the same Alan Wake Bright Falls we know it to be in Quantum Break. And strolling on to the next point, but still on the topic of the old gods of Asgard, this connection is actually in American Nightmare and not Quantum Break. And I will get back to American Nightmare later, but this is a bigger connection, and I want to bring it up now while I'm on the topic of the old gods of Asgard. But this has to do with that song I mentioned before, which funnily enough was written by our very own Barry Wheeler. But in American Nightmare, when listening to the song, everything seems fine and dandy, just being about the dark beings and shadow people from the first game. But if you decide to go the extra distance and actually reverse the last few verses of that song, there is a backmasking that can be found. And what can be heard when playing in reverse is, "It will happen again in a town named Ordinary." Now, Ordinary is a huge deal in this universe, and with the song saying that, that's kind of a huge deal. But honestly, I will get back to Ordinary with Control. I was just using this to move over to our next connection. So you can actually find some documents explaining that the ripples caused by Will's university test in 2016 affected the town of Ordinary, the same town that the Ordinary Altered World event happened to our Control protagonist, Jesse Faden. So how would the ripples have affected Ordinary along with Samantha in This House is a Dream if the universes were not connected? Though I will return to Ordinary and Samantha with due time. Off of that though, I want to go on to the next point, and that is Night Springs. As I said before, Night Springs is one of those things that actually branch between all three of the bigger trilogy games, along with American Nightmare, Quantum Break not being left out. You can not only find an audition tape for Night Springs showing off some of the writers of the game pretending to be people auditioning for the fake show. Along with that though, multiple people can be found wearing Night Springs t-shirts, one being Will Joyce himself. And honestly, on to the last thing I want to bring up with Quantum Break, and that is actually more of a reference to Alan Wake more than any connection really. I just thought it was kind of funny and a great reference. But you can find some Monarch guards having a conversation where one asked another what they would be doing once everything was over, and the other replies, "I'm gonna buy a tanning bed and live in it." Which is exactly what Barry Wheeler says to Alan during the events of Alan Wake. And what is funny about that is the soldier even says it's a reference that the other wouldn't understand. I don't know, I just liked that. But really, that is all the connections and all of the references I found for Quantum Break, which as I said is kind of impossible to look past as they say that the games are not technically connected. But really, I think the only reason they are not officially and technically connected is due to the IP issues. And that is why I say, and a lot of others say, that this is not officially connected. But come on, this is not just buses and Easter eggs like my Dead Island and Dying Light video. But really, let's move on to the next game, and the connections that Control bring into the universe. Okay, so Control is the most recent in the trilogy, with Alan Wake soon to boot that title, but Control is also the game to actually confirm the connected universes. As at first, it was all speculation, only pulling things together with documents and certain phrases said throughout the games. But with Control and its AWE DLC, the universe was set in stone. So right off the bat, I will say that there are a lot of little Easter eggs in Control, along with a whole lot of right-in-your-face references. I mean, Wake and Zane are outright in the game along with the evil Dr. Hartman, so yeah, it is easy to know that these games are connected right off the bat. But it goes far, far deeper than most people even know. The first thing I want to go into is Ordinary and a couple of the things I have mentioned previously in this video. Okay, so pay attention because things are about to get a little crazy. So pretext to what Ordinary is, it is the location of the projector artifact and the Ordinary Altered World event, the same event that happened to Jesse and Dylan Faden, in which Jesse hunts down the Fax and her brother within the old house in Control. But Ordinary has been referenced multiple times before Control was even released. Now this could be a connection in itself, but since it's all surrounding Ordinary, I will group this up with Control. Going back to that song in American Nightmare that I had mentioned, it states when played backwards that it will all happen again in a town named Ordinary. Yeah, the same Ordinary. And Ordinary was also one of the locations said to be affected by the quantum ripples. But things in Ordinary go even deeper than most things in this connection. So I mentioned before that this house is a dream, which is not a game, but actually a technique that the Remedy team used to promote Alan Wake 2 back in 2012 before that version of the game was scrapped. But the team created a fake blog that was written by them and put it onto the internet describing events that happened within the game universe. So, as it goes, the blog was written by Samantha, a woman who lived in the town of Ordinary. Yes, as I said, that same Ordinary. The blog kicks off with Samantha moving into Ordinary and finding a random shoebox in her attic. And that was the only thing left behind. Inside of the shoebox, she found a bunch of notes and poems written by none other than Thomas Zane, Wake's possible creator, protector, or just doppelganger. She honestly thinks nothing of it, but soon after finding that shoebox and all the notes in it, it suddenly disappears, and Samantha had no idea what had happened to it. Well, soon after the box went missing, Samantha began having dreams and nightmares like she had never before. In said dreams, people kept breaking into her house wearing government clothing sporting the letters AWE. They would always break into her house and steal the shoebox from her. This was later confirmed by the FBC, or the Federal Bureau of Control, to have been memories rather than dreams, and the FBC's Ultraworld Events sector had in fact retrieved the box from her, along with somehow erasing her memory. This also makes sense as in Control you can find documents pertaining to the collection of all known shoeboxes. After this happens, Samantha begins looking into Zane and his poetry, but can't ever find anything about him, as if he never existed. What's interesting about that is in Control, Jessie claims that she actually enjoys the poetry of Thomas Zane, though her psychiatrist informs her that there is no poet by the name of Thomas Zane. Though there is a Thomas Zane that was a filmmaker in the 60s, but it couldn't be the same person. Think about that though. In the AWE DLC for Control, Zane and Wake can be found having a conversation in which Zane tells Wake that he is in fact a filmmaker and Alan Wake is a role in an upcoming project that Zane was working on. This is interesting knowing that the Ordinary AWE had to do with a projector as one would watch film on. This is also important when it comes to Alan Wake 2, but I will return to that in a second. Back to this house as a dream, Samantha continues to have these dreams and nightmares, now of the shadow people from Alan Wake affecting her town and house. But she has one final dream, this time of Alan Wake himself. Wake apparently tells her that the house she is living in was originally his house. Now interestingly, if Samantha cannot find any knowledge on Thomas Zane, there is a possibility that since Alan Wake is such a famous writer, who also went missing, she could have recognized Zane to actually be Wake, as they are in fact doppelgangers. Though after Samantha wakes up from that final dream, suddenly the shoebox is back, this time filled with something new. The shoebox is filled of new pages, this time a manuscript written by none other than Alan Wake. And can you guess what the manuscript is? Drumroll please. That's right. Return, the same manuscript that is at the end of the Writer DLC for Alan Wake, the same manuscript mentioned in Quantum Break, the same manuscript in American Nightmare, the same manuscript in Alan Wake 2, and the same manuscript that set off so many events in Control's story. Along with these pages is the one and only clicker, Samantha decided to flip the switch, and suddenly all of the power in her town went out. She and her town actually just chalks it up to being caused by a thunderstorm. But I, along with a lot of other people who have looked into this, believe that there is a chance that the blackout was caused by the quantum ripples, which were reported to have hit Ordinary. Now I know some of you might say the blog takes place in 2012 and those ripples occurred in 2016, and to that I say, time travel. So I'd say that explains enough. But honestly, that is the story of This House is a Dream and how it heavily connects both Alan Wake and Control. On to the grander picture of Control, I honestly did not even expect things to be as crazy as they were. And while reading through some of the documents in-game and some of the articles I found on the interwebs, I learned that everything, yes, everything in Control was set off by Alan Wake and his writings in the attempt to escape the dark place. Now some might think that is just a wild claim, but just sit back and get ready for an intense explanation, and I think a few of you will begin to agree with me on this. So going back to 2017, Alice Wake was on the search for her husband Alan, who was still missing. Files in the FBC show that somehow Alice found the FBC along with the Ocean View Motel, and while searching, she actually found Alan behind the same door as Jesse in the AWE DLC, that spiral door within the motel. Shortly after this, in 2019, a page of paper is slipped under the same door in the Ocean View Motel, and I bet you can already guess what that paper is. The first page of the Return manuscript. Now shortly after this is when Jesse Faden arrives at the old house. Now in the AWE DLC, Wake can be seen writing the manuscript, which I could only assume to be Return. In it though, he says the following: Wake needed a hero, and a hero needed a crisis, implying that the havoc at the oldest house is all possibly being written in and curated by Wake and even Zane, only in the attempt to pull Jessie to the FBC and make her the director to get them out of the dark place. Now you may say, Jessie is there for Dylan, but who's to say Dylan's issues are not also written up by Wake? Heck, who's to say that both of them are even real at all? Wake could have written both Jesse and Dylan up himself as a problem solver. I mean, we barely know anything about Jessie or her family, and on top of that, Wake seems to know more than we do about her. And as I said before, Jesse's one of those few people who know who Zane is. But nevertheless, Jesse arrives at the oldest house, the headquarters of the FBC. Now everyone who's played Control knows that Jesse becomes the new director of the FBC almost immediately after arriving, but I don't know if a lot of people know exactly why that is. So in a little reference of its own, you can actually find the script for an episode of Night Springs. Now a little background on Night Springs, I've mentioned it a couple times, but it is a ripoff of the show Twilight Zone. And if you know the Twilight Zone, then you might know that the famous writer Stephen King has actually worked on a few episodes of that show. So of course it would be a wasted opportunity to not have this universe's famous writer Alan Wake also be an occasional writer for Night Springs. And said episode found in Control is one of those episodes written by Wake. But this is kind of a crazy episode. What is written is actually the death of the director of the FBC. Yeah, you read exactly what happened to Trench right before Jesse shows up, and with Wake having written that episode, then that means Wake wrote the death of the director, bringing it to reality as he's done with Casey and so many other things. Files found in the FBC declare that Wake is a paranatural entity with his ability to create artifacts of power, which are his manuscripts. And scripts for a show are quite similar to manuscripts for a book. But that means Wake wrote the death of the director only for the sole purpose of Jessie, or his hero, to have herself a crisis, setting off all of the events of Control. Now, as I said, that one is not proven, but it is really something to think about. On to the last big connection, which is a sequence of dialogue between Wake and Zane, where Wake seems confused on who Zane really is. And Zane explains that he's a filmmaker who is working on a project to get them out of the dark place. Alan then begins to worry about his evil doppelganger, Mr. Scratch, who was on the hunt for Wake. Zane tells Wake, though, that he too has been in contact with Mr. Scratch, and Wake did not have to worry, as Zane would keep it handled as long as Alan keeps hard at work with the returned manuscript. Now, I think we will see quite a lot of that come from Alan Wake 2, and we will have to just wait a couple of weeks for the release of that game. But onto some of the little side references and connections that were in the game before the big AWE DLC fully connected everything. First off, you can find not only FBC files about the Thermos collectible that you find in Alan Wake, but it is also an object of power that you find being held with the other artifacts. The next little thing is that Jesse can be heard listening to Old Gods of Asgard, which of course is the famous Bright Falls band, and on top of that, you can find FBC files pertaining to Thor and Odin, saying that not only they, but also Alan, were victims of kidnapping that was done by Dr. Hartman, which means that Alan Wake was actually kidnapped by Hartman in the hopes of the manuscript, also kidnapping others who knew anything about the Shadow People or what had been going on in Bright Falls. And onto the last little side thing, and that would have to be another reference to our favorite agent, Barry Wheeler. Near the beginning of the AWE DLC, while trying to figure out a way to deal with the possessed, Langston tells you a series of things that could be used as a light source. One of the things he says is that you could wrap yourself in Christmas lights. This is actually what Barry does in Alan Wake, saying it's like garlic to a vampire. But really, that's honestly all I have for that. I mean, as I said, there are a bunch of different documents and references and Easter eggs, but I really wanted to go over the bigger things and my favorite things. And that is really all I have for Control, which concludes the main trilogy of the universe. But that does not mean this video is over yet, as we do have a little side game, maybe not the sequel of Alan Wake, and maybe not the next game in the release order, but a game in the universe nonetheless. So yeah, as I said, this is just a side game, and it might not be the next game in the release date order, but now I want to talk about Alan Wake's American Nightmare. You know, I never actually paid much attention to this game, playing it back when it was released, but after playing it again, I felt like it deserves a spot on this list. So let's just get right into it. So playing fully through it again after a good few years, soaking up every detail and piece of story I could, I still have no clue what's going on in this game, and really, American Nightmare on the surface feels like B-roll. Almost as if this game went without our good old Alan Wake, it could be mistaken for any other arcade survival shooter. But looking deeper into the story, I realized that this game actually backs up the big point I have Control, almost proving that Wake is responsible for everything that happens to the oldest house and the FBC. But in American Nightmare though, the story in all honesty has nothing really to do with the mainline story, being more of a way to just expand on the universe. But there are a few things that do point towards this game having at least a little to do with the main scheme of things, such as Balance slays the dragon mentioning Ordinary, or even this game being what really opens up on Mr. Scratch. Though, as I said, this game does set up a couple of giant things that I think even the developers and writers had absolutely no idea what they were truly preparing us for. Getting right into the game's story, I actually want to do a quick recap on what exactly the game is about, as I feel the majority of you may have skipped this game or maybe did not even understand it, as I didn't really the first time I played it. And don't worry, this will be a speedy recap. So the game starts off with my one and only guy, Barry Wheeler, being the new manager of the Old Gods of Asgard. He's asleep in a motel room when suddenly the TV blasts on, showing Night Springs beginning to play. We learn that the episode in question that is about to play is written by none other than Alan Wake. We then see Alan wandering his way through the dark place, being confronted by Mr. Scratch. They converse for a little while before Wake crashes down, waking up in the fictional town of Night Springs, Arizona. He then has to travel through the town, repeating the same day over and over again, using the manipulation of the manuscript to change the environment and reality around him, in hopes of defeating Mr. Scratch, who is going on a serial killing spree through Night Springs, acting as Alan Wake. Alan eventually defeats Scratch, ending off in what only appears as the death of Scratch, along with Alan reuniting with Alice and escaping the dark place. If that is the case though, how is Alan still missing and trapped in both Control and Alan Wake 2? Well, let me just say that things go way deeper, as most things do in this video. So the first thing I actually want to look at is the location of the game, being Night Springs. So it is believed, with Night Springs being fictional and based off Bright Falls, that Wake wrote the town into existence using his paranatural abilities, somehow in the hopes of escaping the dark place. Though I and many others believe that Alan is actually writing himself into the Night Springs TV show to get the attention of Barry Wheeler or anyone else watching. This one makes sense, as of course Alan writes episodes of Night Springs, and along with that we also see him on a TV show in the Alan Wake 2 trailers, which makes me think this could possibly be connected, though I don't know about that yet. Along with this, instead of American Nightmare being narrated by Wake as if he's reading off a manuscript, it is actually being narrated in a cryptic and mysterious way, exactly the same as the Night Springs shows is narrated, and even how Twilight Zone is. Another good point is when talking to the scientist at the observatory, she mentions that all of the stars and the sky itself are all wrong, not aligning with the usual, which would only make sense if they are not in the real world. The last point to make me believe that Alan has not created the town of Night Springs into reality, rather written himself into the show, because Zane is nowhere to be found. Though in Alan Wake, we learn that Zane can only not enter the cabin on Cauldron Lake. Therefore, I'm pretty sure that Alan is still trapped in that same room, and he is writing everything still from there. Why is this such a big deal? Well, remember what I mentioned about Wake having written the events of Trench's death, and so making Jesse the director of the FBC? Well, he did all of that through an episode of Night Springs to get the attention of Jesse. Sound familiar? Well, I'm just gonna leave the rest of that one to you all. But the next thing I noticed was the ending. Sure, it is easy to assume that Alan made it out and back to Alice, but honestly, I'm not so sure. I think all of this could be another cruel joke brought on by Scratch, or even just the dark place in general, just like the other 3 times Wake had to restart his journey through Night Springs. Aside from Wake still seeming to be trapped in the trailers for the next entry, we actually get an end credit scene for American Nightmare, where Barry wakes up yelling out for Alan as he knew he must have heard him, though the TV shows nothing but static, and it seems that Wake's efforts still did not work. The one thing that does make me rethink this a little bit is in the trailers for Alan Wake 2, we actually see a few shots where Wake is wearing that same checkered button-up from American Nightmare, and only from American Nightmare. On top of that, Alice finds Wake at the end of this game, and in Control, files indicate that Alice was the first one to find Alan in the ocean view, so possibly what we see at the ending of American Nightmare is what she is seeing behind that spiral door in the ocean view. Though I do know that that one is a bit of a far stretch. The next interesting thing I noticed may be small and just a reference, but in the projector room of the drive-in, you interact with a flippable movie poster, which both sides could have a big meaning. One side is for Thomas Zane, which is interesting for 2 reasons. First being that Zane is depicted wearing his bright light scuba suit. And not only does no one know who Thomas Zane is, so why is this poster there, but only Alan knows Zane in that form as well. So I would say this is definitely all either a TV show or in a dream within the dark place. The second interesting thing about that is that Zane the poet does not exist, but Zane the filmmaker does. And this is found on a movie poster in a film festival at a drive-in. But flipping the movie poster over displays an Alex Casey noir thriller. This is also big, as we see in Control that Casey was actually written into existence, along with seeing him in the trailers for Alan Wake 2. Flipping to this Casey side as well, it is a big part of rewriting the manuscript, the same return manuscript that we have seen countless times since. So could this mean that this is the episode of Night Springs that brings Casey to life? Or is there a possibility that with all of the Zane filmmaker references in Control, along with the projectors being seen in the Alan Wake 2 trailers, that Wake moved from this Night Springs episode into a Casey thriller movie, or even show? This could also be the reason that Wake is in New York interacting with Casey. Though again, this is another one of those long shots. And really, onto the last connection of American Nightmare, and really just an interesting thing that I have found, and that is pretty obvious, and that is that the episode of Night Springs that is this game is named Return. Now, does this mean that American Nightmare is in fact the return that we have heard of so many times, being what brings Wake back into reality? Or just like Departure, is it just another first draft that has so many more revisions to go through before getting to the return we see everywhere else in the Remedy universe? But really, that is all that I found in American Nightmare, and honestly, I know I didn't find quite as much in this game as the other games, along with this being the last playable game I bring up, but that's because it is less of an entry in the main story and more of just a detour through the dark place. And with that wrapped up, I want to bring this video to the last stop of the Remedy universe. Okay, I know, Alan Wake 2 is not even out yet, so how could I have any connections, blah 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 blah. The trailers say everything that they need to say. I want to also preface that I definitely could have missed some things, but unlike the rest of this video, everything I found in the Alan Wake 2 trailer so far, I have found completely myself and without the help of any other articles or videos. But right into the first thing I noticed actually goes back to Quantum Break, with the Return trailer. So sure, the Return trailer in Quantum Break is slightly different from the trailers we have seen for Alan Wake 2, but to be fair, almost every scene in that fake trailer is recreated in the actual Alan Wake 2 trailer. From 2 FBI agents investigating Wake's disappearance, to Casey's death, Wake being blamed for Casey's death, Wake wearing his American Nightmare outfit, all the way to showing off the same spooky woods of Bright Falls. I mean, it seems like they've really had the story of Alan Wake 2 set up for the past while now, even before Quantum Break in 2016, but even all the way back to the Return manuscript being in Alan Wake's The Writer DLC, and in American Nightmare. But obviously, we see the Return manuscript in the trailers of Alan Wake 2. And with the return of Alan Wake to the real world, I bet most of you already assume where I'm going with this. Yes, the completion of the Return manuscript finally brings Alan back to reality and out of the dark place. Though in the trailer, we see Wake with the Return manuscript, and he suddenly starts scratching away his own name from the title page. This might indicate that Wake did not write it and he knows. Maybe Zane did, or due to the markings being black scratches, what if the manuscript is written by Mr. Scratch? We will honestly just have to wait to see about that though. You can also see in the trailer that Wake is at some point still being stuck in the same room that he is writing Departure in the first game, when suddenly either Wake or Zane, or Scratch, bust into the room. Now you can see the door of the room behind them, and you can actually see the same spiral as the same Ocean View motel door that both Alice and Jesse find Alan behind. This could mean that the dark place, or at least where Alan has been stuck writing, is possibly in the same location as the Ocean View motel, or both could be secretly located within the oldest house. Another thing we see in the Alan Wake 2 trailer is that we see Wake on what looks to be a TV talk show, and he seems awfully confused, like he has no clue on what's going on. The host of the show sits down Wake to talk about his new book, The Initiation, which is not a book nor manuscript that we have even heard yet. So the talk show that Wake is on is called In Between with Mr. Door. Now Mr. Door is someone we've heard of before in Control. Dylan explains that he has had dreams of someone named Mr. Door who can travel the multiverse, shifting between them. Now keep the phrasing in mind there with shifting. Now the interesting thing about this is Door could be a synonym to Hatch, and Mr. Hatch is someone who played a major role in Quantum Break. R.I.P. to Lance Reddick, the actor who portrayed Hatch, and has passed away since. He was an amazing actor, and he honestly will be missed. But in Quantum Break near the end, Jack is confronted by a mysterious being in the middle of a ripple. The man is shifting in and out of time and space, and what even seems like reality. Now Jack comments on what he believes this figure could be, saying it could have been Hatch. On top of all of this, not only does Door sound like Hatch, but Mr. Door looks an awful lot like Mr. Hatch. And Dylan does say that Mr. Door can shift through the multiverses just as Hatch seems to be able to do in Quantum Break. Now, as I said before, we actually can't assume anything with Lake announcing that Quantum Break is not officially part of the trilogy, but I guess we will just have to wait and see what's going on with Mr. Door in that talk show. But back to the talk show, Wake is talking to Mr. Door about a book we have no clue about. What is interesting about that is initiation is usually what one goes through when joining things like a gang or cults. And if you saw my past Alan Wake 2 video, then you would know that Alan Wake 2 is not only about Wake's return, but the FBI investigating a string of cult murders in Bright Falls. So I wonder where that new manuscript may be leading things, and there's a possibility that it could not have even been written by Wake himself. Another thing that is interesting about this is Wake seems to just appear backstage, having no clue what is going on or where he even is. With this, what is interesting though, is Zane mentions his film, and the trailer for Alan Wake 2, we see Wake interacting with a projector and film, even being in an all-out theater. This does not only connect with what Zane says in Control, but also the fact that either Wake or Zane used to live in Ordinary, and the Alterworld event that occurs in Ordinary occurred due to a freaking projector. I mean, it all adds up just a little bit too well. But moving on to the last thing that I have to bring up about Alan Wake 2 and its trailers, is that the location we see Wake in. It looks like he's in New York, a very dark and distorted version of New York, but New York nonetheless. Along with this, he seems to be in a couple of areas that could be subways or old caves, but honestly, it looks a lot like the oldest house and the FBC. It would make sense that Wake could be at the oldest house for two reasons. First being that Wake was found both by Alice and Jesse through the oldest house and the FBC. And can you guess where the oldest house is located? Oh, you already know, that is right, none other than New York City. So I am most likely assuming that we will learn more about the oldest house, the FBC, and maybe even Jesse Faden in this next release. But really, that's about everything I found that are big right-in-your-face details and references in the trailers for Alan Wake 2, along with the obvious Alex Casey, Alan Wake, Bright Falls, which everyone could have expected with the things we've seen in the last games. And really, I can't wait to see what other secrets that Alan Wake 2 has for us to uncover. But yeah, there are quite a lot of things that connect these games together, be it all-out connections or smaller Easter egg references, and with Alan Wake 2 only a couple of weeks away, I bet this absolutely wild and confusing story will become even more wild and more mind-boggling. But with all of the little details and files, I could keep going for a couple more hours, and really, I can feel myself rambling like a complete madman. And honestly, this has already taken so much out of me, having to read and research so much, along with playing through all of the 3 bigger games and American Nightmare, all just to get this video out. And really, I already know this is easily my longest video so far. So I will wrap everything up with this last statement. I will never be able to actually wrap my head around this whole flustercuck story, and really, I am so excited to uncover more in the next entry. But as I always say, I think that is about all for this video. So, you know, as always, throw any thoughts you had on this video and all of the crazy connections between these 3 awesome games in the comments now. And if you enjoyed watching this vid, please hit it with a like, and if you want to see more, take a detour over to my channel now, and don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on everything new. And as always, if you're looking to support the channel any more than you people already do, you can go ahead and check out a membership to either my YouTube or Patreon now to get your name at the end of every video, along with some other perks and supporting more videos like this. Do not feel pressured though. As I said, you already all do plenty. And lastly, if you heard any music that you enjoyed and want to hear more, check out BillyTheWhip.com or just Billy the Whip on any music platform for something brand new to listen to. And finally here, I hope you all are looking forward to my Alan Wake 2 video. I thank you all so much for sitting through this terribly long video, and I hope you all have an absolutely amazing day. I'm surprised I got through that.
God, this community is overreacting.